So you're from Cincinnati.
I am.
But I don't think Cincinnati knows about Vivek. So tell me who you are.
So I was born and raised in Cincinnati. My parents came as immigrants in the late 70s in my dad's case, and early 80s in my mom's case. First to Westchester, and then they moved to Evendale when we were I was about 6 years old, before first grade. Born and raised there, went to Princeton schools through 8th grade, went to St. X for high school. St. X was a cool experience because I was back then one of the lone Hindu kids in a Catholic high school. And so the religious component of that education actually meant a lot to me. Actually, I took a lot away from it. I ended up joining the board of St. X again a couple of years later, stayed close to the school, but ended up leaving Cincinnati for a long period of time. I went to Harvard for college, studied biology. I was a nerdy science guy for most of college. Ended up in the world of biotech investing in New York City, and then actually left my investment job to found a biotech company. Did that for 7 years, worked on a number of drugs. 5 of them are FDA-approved medicines today, which I'm incredibly proud of. But I stepped down from my job as a biotech CEO to tackle what I saw as some cultural challenges in America. Cultural challenges that threatened to kill the American dream, that had allowed me to achieve everything I ever had in my life, which by that point I had been plenty successful. I had just had kids. The question was, how do we actually create that American dream for the next generation? And that moved me to leave my job as a biotech CEO to write the books that I've written, to travel the country as I have over the last several years, and to really develop a vision of what it actually means to be an American today. I think that's what we're missing in our country. I tried to solve that problem through the market. I started a firm called Strive, based right here in Columbus, to compete with BlackRock and others that I think have politicized corporate America. But I really thought at the heart of this is this national identity crisis, where people my age, really any age today, are hungry for purpose and meaning at a moment when we've lost our sense of American identity, lost our sense of faith, patriotism, hard work, family, the things that used to ground our sense of identity. That's what I think we're missing. And I'm running on a campaign to really, it's less of a political campaign, though I am running for president. It's more of a cultural campaign to revive the heart, soul, and identity of this nation.
I'm really curious about this search for an American identity. So where do you look? What do you find?
Well, I think one of the places we look is, let's look to the ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. I think they're the principles that set the nation into motion. Basic ideas like free speech and open debate, self-expression, self-governance over aristocracy as our way of settling political questions. The radical idea that the people who we elect to run the government are the ones who actually run the government. These are basic ideas. I don't think they hold true today. And they didn't hold true in Old World Europe, but we fought a revolution in 1776 to set those ideas into motion. Meritocracy, unbridled merit in this country, the idea that you get ahead not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and contributions. These are fundamentally American ideas. We have lost our commitment to those ideas, but I don't think that has to be permanent. I think we can rediscover that. And then part of it's also a founding culture in this country, where we can be unafraid. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, he's a hero. He's probably my favorite president because not only did he write that Declaration of Independence, which is the best mission statement for a nation I think that's ever been written, but he also decided that he needed a swivel chair to write it. So you know what he did? He invented the swivel chair. He didn't say, I'm not an expert, I'm not a technocrat, I can't do that. He was an autodidact. He taught himself and did it. And that's the founding culture that I think we miss in this country too. And I think this is a campaign about identity. And I think that that's what we're missing in our country. And if we fill that identity void, addressing our other problems on the global stage or economically become that much easier. And I'm prepared to take those on too, but I think we got to go in order.
You know what's interesting to me is that you just quoted or talked about 2 Democrats. Are you a conservative?
I am a conservative in my views, but you know what? I think that I'm not a fan of these labels. I think they're artificial. I think the divide between Republicans and Democrats isn't the real political divide that matters in America today. The real political divide in America that matters is whether you are pro-American, that is, you unapologetically embrace the ideals that I described, the ideals that birthed this nation, or are you fundamentally anti-American? Do you wish to apologize for those ideals and the existence of a nation on the back of them? And I don't think that's a 50-50 split. I think most people in this country are in the pro-American camp, regardless of whether they're black or white, regardless of whether they're Democrat or Republican. And that's why I think 2024 has the opportunity to be a landslide election that unifies this country. And bluntly, I'm running for president to deliver that.
Is there no middle ground there?
Well, I don't see a national unity being built around compromise of ideals, right? To say that can't we all show up in the proverbial middle, hold hands, sing kumbaya, and compromise. I actually think the way we deliver national unity is the other way, is actually by embracing the radicalism of the ideals that set America itself into motion. Because ideas like free speech and self-governance and excellence and meritocracy, these are radical ideas for most of human history because it was done the other way most of the time. Compared to old world Europe, these are extreme ideas. These are radical ideas. But those are the ideals that bind us together across our diversity as Americans. And I just think we've celebrated our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all the ways we're really just the same as Americans. And so I don't see the right path to unity as compromising around the radicalism of those ideas. I think the right path is to embrace the radicalism of those shared American ideas. I think that is how we unify this country.
How did growing up in the tri-state,
Yeah.
going to a Catholic high school, how did all of that shape who you are today?
Well, I think part of it was I was the kid of immigrants who did stand out a little bit in Southwest Ohio back in the 1990s. I think the immigrant population has picked up steadily over the last 3-4 decades. Mm-hmm. But I think that there was some element of, on one hand, we didn't have to travel the country to travel the country, if you know what I mean. If you go 100-mile radius of Cincinnati or the tri-state area, and we had, by the way, cousins growing up from Bedford, Indiana, to Hazard, Kentucky, to Dayton, to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where we spent Thanksgivings. We would go a couple 100-mile radius just traveling our extended family. It'd feel like you travel the country. I mean, that is a cross-section of America right there in the tri-state area, right where we grew up, on the one hand. And on the other hand, we were a little different, right? I had a funny last name. I was a skinny kid with nerdy glasses that had this disproportionate emphasis on academics and science and math. A dad who spoke with an accent that was different than the other kids' dads spoke with their accents. We were a little different going to Princeton schools through 8th grade, in one sense. We're a little bit different in a different way, going to St. X. And I think that was great. That was actually, to me, the experience of true diversity in America. It's not just preaching about diversity and just different skin color, but even just different experiences. My dad would take us back to the village where he grew up in India for our summer breaks. That's what summer break looked like when we were in 1st and 2nd grade. And then when we came back, it gave us a taste of a different background for a couple of months over the summer where my dad grew up. But to bring that into the everyday of being a Midwestern kid in the 1990s in Cincinnati, I think that was what made the experience so cool, was the fact that it's a cross-section of the country. It's not some echo chamber or bubble like growing up in Manhattan. And by the way, when I went to Harvard and Yale, a lot of kids grew up in Manhattan, perfectly fine kids, but they had a very different upbringing that was not representative of what it actually meant to grow up in America. But to do it not just as a kid whose parents had always grown up in Cincinnati either, but who came to that, in some ways as an outsider, but integrated really into that culture and contributed to that culture too. And I think that's what the melting pot story is all about. And to me, so my experience of growing in Cincinnati was, I'm thinking about, on near Harper's Point, they have that restaurant we used to drive by, the melting pot. That's what the image in my head that comes up when I say this. But America is a melting pot, and I think that was a big part of our own upbringing and identity in this country.
When I grew up, so my mother was an immigrant to this country, and she wanted us to become Americans, right? So she wanted us to be part of this melting pot. That has not been the way. Like, it sort of feels as if we've become more siloed as a country. It feels like that's what you're fighting against.
Yeah, and I'm as much fighting against that as I am fighting for the revival of those shared ideals that actually brought us all to this special place we call America. America isn't just some geographic space where we all roam around celebrating our different shades of melanin, doing what our iPhones told us to do on a given day. I mean, sometimes that's what America looks like today to me. But I think we forgot the American dream, right? It's like we call it a dream for a reason. When you wake up from a dream, you sort of forget what it was all about. You kind of remember how it felt. I think that's the stage we're in. And if we let it go much longer, we'll forget even that feeling itself. And so I think we can revive these shared ideals that unify us across our differences. And that is what the melting pot refers to. It doesn't pretend or reject that we have many ethnic heritages in this country. To the contrary, it celebrates that, but we can't just celebrate that. Our diversity can be a beautiful thing. I think it is a beautiful thing if, and only if, there's shared ideals that we, really deeply share in common. And so in a certain sense, we got to the celebrating the diversity part and claiming that it was beautiful, but to me it's meaningless if we really forget that which unifies us. And so I'm running on a campaign for reviving that shared identity. And if we do that, then we can actually address the real external threats that we face, from communist China to economic struggles. Some of those threats involve the willingness to make sacrifice to address this. And this is something my parents taught me growing up in Cincinnati too. You want to start a family, you want to get married, you want to have kids, those things do involve a sacrifice. Even taking care of your parents when they age and get old, that involves a sacrifice. But you can sacrifice for something if you believe it's worth sacrificing for. And I think the same thing goes as a citizen of this country. There are certain sacrifices we're going to have to make to take on China, to revive the sustainability of America fiscally or financially. But we can make those sacrifices if we know what we're sacrificing for. Yet that's the very American identity we've forgotten, which is why I'm so focused on it.
Okay, so you are obviously well accomplished academically and from a business standpoint, but you have never run for office before. So what makes someone say, hey, never run for office before, I don't have a last name like Trump that everyone knows because I've had a TV show for forever. I'm running for president, and I think I can win.
Yeah, so I'm not running to be a politician, I'll tell you that. If I was building my political career, I would have done it very differently. People have been, for the last several years, encouraging me to run for Senate here in Ohio, consider the governorship here in Ohio. And I think, look, it's really important to have good people in those roles, but what draws me into this race isn't entering a political career. To the contrary, I'd rather have positive change through the private sector, through starting businesses like Strive, through writing books like Woke Inc. or Nation of Victims, or a third book that I've written that's coming out. That's a great way to drive change and certainly a lot more manageable with a young family as well. So selfishly, that seems like a good way to do it. But I just think we're in the middle of this identity void as a country where there isn't another candidate in this movement that's actually offering specific solutions for how we deliver that national identity. And it's not a moment where, a 999 tax plan or a Social Security reform plan delivers what this nation needs. If it is, then great. I'd love to help a different candidate and pass on that vision as a policy advisor behind the scenes or whatever to let them do it. I think, though, we live in a moment where if you're talking about reviving a missing national identity, it can't be somebody else's vision that they handed over to you in a binder. It has to be somebody whose own bone-deep conviction runs so deep that you can actually deliver it with authenticity. And so for me, a lot of the positions I've espoused, they're controversial positions that other Republican candidates have shied away from. I've called for ending affirmative action, race-based affirmative action in this country, for being prepared to use the military to actually solve the cartel problem in south of the border in Mexico to address the fentanyl crisis in this country. Other Republican candidates aren't really saying these things out loud, but my ability to do it is grounded in my own personal conviction and vision for this country. And so I think here we can't have a separation of the politician and the visionary. I think we live in a moment where we need both of them in the same candidate. And that's why I'm running for president, not because I have some hubris or some attachment to winning political office. It's because I think I have a vision that this country hungers for and can actually answer that hard question. Who are we? What does it mean to be an American today that sets us up well for the next generation?
All right, so you said you want to end affirmative action.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it is a cancer on our national soul. It is a form of de facto racism. It is an attack on merit. Today, we live in a place where, if we're really being honest about it, whether it's in universities, whether it's in corporate America, the best person doesn't get the job anymore. And you know what? America was supposed to be a country where whoever is going to be most successful in that role, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their genetics, whoever's going to do the best job, they're the ones who get the promotion. They're the ones who get the job. They're the ones who get the seat in college. That isn't the case today. And I don't think there's a person watching us have this conversation that doesn't believe deep in their heart somewhere that what I'm saying is untrue. I think everyone knows it to be true. I think we need to talk about that in the open. But here's the sad part. It's not just a form of anti-white and anti-Asian racism, though it is that. it is also fueling an unfair kind of new anti-black racism in this country. Because there's no way to foster racism better, more effectively, than to take something away from a different racial group on the basis of the color of their skin. That's what fosters grievance. That's what fosters a new wave of anti-black racism. I haven't met a black colleague or classmate in my life who wasn't capable of accomplishing everything I have. And what are we telling those kids in the next generation? It's that you need special help from the system, that you need someone to lift you up. That is psychological slavery. We talk about slavery 250 years ago. We're creating a form of psychological slavery that teaches black kids that they can't achieve what everyone in this country is actually able, most everyone in this country is actually able to achieve with their own hard work and commitment and dedication. And have there been some sins in the past? Of course there have been. We're not a perfect nation. Part of what makes us a nation based on ideals is also what makes us human beings. We will fall short of those ideals, but we have to look forward on how we're going to address that rather than doing this by looking in the rearview mirror, or else we're just going to keep crashing.
What would you say to someone who says that you have a racist philosophy?
I would say that's false. I would say that actually the best way to end discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race, as John Roberts said it. I actually believe in the power of every individual to empower himself or herself regardless of the color of their skin. And let's have an open conversation about other things we need to address. Look, people ask me about this in the context of elite colleges. You say get rid of affirmative action. I say get rid of legacy admissions, right? People, I went to Harvard, I went to Yale. My kids should not get a special preference just because they're the kid of somebody who did. I'm in favor of true meritocracy. It's not just race-based preferences. There's other impediments to meritocracy in this country too. I favor removing those. I also think that we need to reform the education system in this country, where it really tilts the scales away from disproportionately poor and black communities, where you want to take a look at those COVID policies, those COVID school closures, okay? Let's talk Cincinnati for a second. Cincinnati public schools were closed, I believe, for close to a better part of a year, if not an entire year. You know, my alma mater where I went to high school, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to go to St. X. I think they missed 4 or 5 days max. Well, that's a story that you see nationwide writ large. That creates a form of educational inequity that's going to last for a generation, created by the very people who were spouting off about equity. Well, you know what? In the name of equity, they'll say that math is racist. Math is not racist, but you know what might be racist? Teaching a bunch of black kids how to do math while you're teaching the rest of the country exactly how to advance themselves. So I think that in the name of calling other people names, the progressive movement in this country is actually creating the very kind of inequity that they rail about. And there's a cynical part to this. Once you claim to be the solver of a problem, you get addicted to that problem. Because you know what? If you solve that problem, then you're the one who's out of a job. And I think that's the problem with the managerial class in this country, is they're addicted to the problems they complain about. They have this codependent relationship because the existence of the problem is what keeps them getting their paycheck. And so I care about actually solving those problems. It's why I've said let's abolish the Department of Education. Sounds like a radical proposal, but I don't think the federal government should have anything to do with education in this country. $80 billion spent through that department. Imagine if we just gave $1.6 billion to each of the 50 states and then direct that to school choice that allows people to have the high school education that I had. That's actually how you address it. Now, that's not popular in the progressive movement. That's not popular amongst teachers' unions. But you know what? Is that really about antipathy towards black students or poor students? No, it's actually caring for the students at the expense of the managerial class. And so the next time someone calls you a name, and I get called plenty, ask yourself what incentive they have to make that name up for you. And it usually comes down to their own paycheck, not actually solving the problem they care to solve.
Which of those names that you get called ticks you off the most?
You know, to tell you the truth, it doesn't really get to me that much, actually, because you see through the trick for what it is. People lash out when they're insecure, when they themselves feel like they're not on firm footing. And it's one of the reasons I try to do what many other Republicans don't. What, frankly, many of my competitors in this Republican race for the presidency don't and will not do. I will talk openly to the other side. I will engage in open debate and discourse with the expectation that I'm given a chance to share my views so long as I give you the same courtesy in return. Now I'm going to give my criticism of the progressive movement. Let me give my criticism of the Republican Party a little bit. They will complain about corruption in the federal government without looking at corruption in their own backyard and in their own party. I actually recently just called on Ronna McDaniel publicly to release the criteria for what the debate stage actually looks like. Who makes the debate stage? How do you place candidates on the stage? Crickets. Why? This is a corrupt party. They actually like to game the system. Also, the same thing goes with respect to free speech and open debate. A lot of my competitors in this race like to wax eloquent to their own base in their own silo about free speech while saying there's certain news networks that they won't even talk to because they're mean to them. You know what? I don't believe in that either. I believe that if you want to talk the talk, you better walk the walk. Free speech is about a culture that we create and we have to lead. Even if reporters are mean to us or whatever, we have to actually engage in that open discourse. And so, for me, I think a lot of this name calling is just a charade for people who are insecure. It's not my style. I think my style is actually engaging in the substance. And I hope that's part of the cultural revival we're talking about in both political parties.
How is all of what you're talking about going to get you to the White House?
I think voters are hungry for this. I think they're sick of obsessing over the who. They want solutions. They want the what and the why. And I think people are hungry for national unity. I'll tell you what I said on the stage of CPAC to it's a very conservative, pro-Trump audience. I said, look, you have a choice. Do you want a national divorce or do you want a national revival? And I think that most people in this country are hungry for that national revival. Nobody wants to be on their way towards that national divorce. And I've traveled in places like Iowa and New Hampshire where there'll be people walking in, supporting one candidate, usually Trump, if there's a conservative base, walk out saying that, you know what, I want you to be my president, but can't you just have him involved in some way? I said, you know what, I'll take Trump as an advisor. I'll take anybody who can help me do this job as an advisor. But this is actually about what we want to do for the country. It's not about me. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about Joe Biden. It's not about Ron DeSantis. It is about America. Okay, what does this country stand for? Why do we stand for it? How do we revive that through actual policy solutions? I think people are really hungry for that, and also hungry for someone who will do it without apology. Say the quiet part out loud, from ending affirmative action to abandoning climate religion. A lot of what I'm saying, most people behind closed doors will agree with. And here's what I'll say. You want a good litmus test for the health of this country? It's the difference between what people are willing to say in private and what people are willing to say in public. When there's a big gap between those two things, we're not doing very well. When that gap is small, we're doing pretty well. Right now, I've never seen a bigger gap in my life between what people were willing to say behind closed doors and what people are willing to say in public. And by the time we're done with this campaign, and certainly by the time we're done with the first term of my presidency, that gap will have closed where people feel free to be themselves and to speak openly again. And when they do, what we're going to realize, Tanya, is that most people in this country and their neighbors and their classmates do, too, share those basic commitments in common. They might disagree about corporate tax rates or some of the small details, but when it comes to the basic principles, the basic rules of the road, once we're able to start talking openly again, we will realize that we as Americans share that in common. And that is my pledge. That is what I'm actually going to deliver to this country.
You think it'll raise tolerance?
Absolutely. I mean, tolerance is about understanding someone who has a different point of view to you while still having shared principles in common.
I want to know what was that moment? What was the actual moment when you looked at your wife and you said, honey, I'm running for president? And what was that moment?
It was over Christmas break of this last year. We were sitting there, first time we had a chance to catch a breather. We had started talking about the idea early in December. And I just said, look, I really feel like this is something that we have to do. I feel called to do this for the country. I don't know how we're going to make this work with a young family. Family is a non-negotiable. And so if it's a non-negotiable, that means we're going to make it work. What do you think? And she said, you know what? I don't know how it's going to work either, but if this is what you feel called to do, this is what we're going to do together. And I hope that it brings our family together and makes our family stronger in the same way that it can make our country stronger too. Sometimes you have to just be willing, if there's a cause that you believe in deeply enough, and for me it's this country, to say, I'm going to make that jump. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but the purpose is important enough that everything in life involves taking some risk, but those risks are worth taking. Some of those sacrifices are worth making if you know what you're sacrificing for. And I feel this country's been good to me, okay? I was born in 1985 in the best and greatest nation on earth, but if I had been born 20 years later, even in the same place, even in Cincinnati, I don't think my story would have been possible in the same way. I'd have been taught to be a victim rather than a victor, a winner in America. I'd have been taught to embrace grievance, embrace the color of my skin more than the content of my contributions and the qualities that make me who I really am. And to be able to do what I've done, not just through success in business and living the arc of the American dream as a capitalist, but to do it while getting married, following my faith in God, having kids, and not having to apologize for the values that make me who I am. I don't think that would have been possible if I were born even just 2 decades later. And that's worrisome to me. There's a part of me as an American that leaves me sad about that reality, but I don't think it has to stay that way. I don't think we have to be some nation in an inevitable national decline as they teach us. I don't think we're Rome or Carthage. I think we might just be a little young, going through our version of adolescence, as I did when I was growing up in Cincinnati, figuring out who we really are. And I think we can be stronger on the other side of it. I think in order to get to conviction, the path to conviction runs through doubt. And right now we're in the thick of doubt as a country. But I think on the other side of that, we'll have that sense of conviction again. But it's only going to happen if we have real leadership that takes us there. And I think we need a conservative movement that moves beyond, frankly, even doing what I've been doing a lot of over the last few years, complaining about the endless hypocrisies about the other side. Fine, it's important to see a problem with clear eyes, but where are we going? Who do we want to be when we actually grow up? And the good news about it is we don't have to reinvent that wheel. The ideals and the principles that set this nation into motion, the mission statement in that second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, they give us that light. We just need to rediscover it and revive it. And for me, I think that unapologetic pursuit of excellence, no matter your genetics, to me, that's the heart of what it means to be American. And that's the message I'm going to deliver across this country on this campaign.